The day Clara May Miller was dragged from her one-room shack at the edge of Mercy Ridge was the day the sky forgot to show kindness. Her newborn son, Michael, cried hoarsely against her chest, drawing curious glances and dismissive snickers from the gathering men. The air was thick with late summer dust and unspoken judgments. Clara, 23 but feeling 40, limped across the square with shackled ankles bleeding and mind raw from grief. Her husband buried only 5 nights before, her debts still growing like thistle. The auction platform was crude boards nailed atop crates, blinding in the noon heat. Silas Cray, the auctioneer, wore his black vest with pride and a cruel smile that fit the day too well. "Step up, gentlemen," he roared. "Widow Miller, barely dry from childbirth, comes with a healthy boy. Get 2 for the price of 1, no finer cattle in these parts." He flourished his gavel, daring anyone to contradict. Townsfolk gathered close. Some eyed Clara's bruised arms, others dismissed her worth. Clara kept her gaze fixed on the planks, refusing to beg, refusing to break. She pressed a trembling kiss to Michael's scalp, a wild defiance even now. $10 for the pair, Silas barked, voice slick with opportunity. A ranch hand spat and shouted, "15!" Another drawled, "20," over the rim of a whiskey flask. "25," grunted a heavy-set trader. The numbers danced. Clara imagined herself shrinking smaller with each bid, her soul being whittled down bit by bit. Breathless, dizzy, she wanted to disappear, her boy tucked into her arms, her pride the only shield she had left. From the back came a hush, then a measured voice. $500. Heads turned, surprise mixing with suspicion. A tall stranger stepped out of the shadow of Jack's Mercantile. His boots were dust-worn, his hair graying above weather-beaten eyes. Jacob Avery, Cedar Bend's lonely rancher. His reputation was for quiet and hard work, not charity. Folks whispered he'd lost his wife and child to fever. Some said he'd only love the land again. Silas hesitated, greed battling caution. "500 cash, Mr. Avery?" Jake nodded, hands steady. "Cash. On my honor. And your intentions?" Silas pressed, grinning for the crowd. "What would a man want with this sort of widow?" Jake's gaze cut like wind. "To let her rest, to let her choose. I want nothing but dignity paid forward." Some men jeered, others quieted, sensing a shift in the air. "Crazy old Jake," one muttered, but nobody challenged the bid. Jake rested his hand on his revolver, not threatening, simply unmoved. "Done!" Silas slammed the gavel. The crowd murmured, divided between amusement and awe. Clara didn't dare hope. Jake walked up the steps, knelt beside her, and with a pocket knife sliced the chain from her ankle. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. "No worse than what came before," Clara said, voice ragged. Jake offered his hand. "Jacob Avery. You can call me Jake." For the first time in weeks, Clara accepted help. Her life, her son's life, had been bought with mercy, not malice. They left Mercy Ridge in the settling dust of afternoon, Jake leading his horse while Clara walked beside him, Michael bundled against her chest. The road wound through mesquite and cedar, past dry creek beds and rolling hills that seemed to stretch toward forever. Jake never rushed, matching Clara's unsteady pace as her bare feet found purchase on the rocky ground. "How far?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Another hour, maybe less," Jake replied. "The ranch sits in a valley, good water, shelter from the wind." He glanced at her bloodied ankles but said nothing, understanding that pride sometimes mattered more than comfort. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Cedar Bend Ranch came into view. It wasn't grand, a modest 2-story house with a wide porch, a red barn, stable, chicken coop, and vegetable garden. Behind the main house sat a small cabin, smoke curling from its chimney. "That's yours," Jake said, nodding toward the cabin. "For as long as you need it." Clara studied his face, searching for the catch, the hidden price. "What do you expect in return?" Jake's gray eyes held steady. "I expect you to heal. That's all." The cabin door opened to reveal a clean cot with soft sheets, a wooden cradle lined with fleece, a pot-bellied stove radiating warmth, and a small table set with beef stew, fresh bread, and milk still warm from the cow. Clara set Michael in the cradle, her hands shaking as she touched the blankets, the first soft things she'd felt in months. "I'll bring breakfast at sunrise," Jake said from the doorway. "You need rest more than anything else." As he turned to leave, Clara's voice stopped him. "Wait." She placed a protective hand on the cradle. "If you try to touch me or my son—" "I won't," Jake said simply. "You have my word." "Words are easy to break." Jake nodded. "Then judge me by my actions, not my promises." That first night, Clara barely slept. Every creak of the settling cabin made her reach for the knife hidden beneath her pillow. Every distant sound, an owl's call, the wind through the eaves, set her heart racing. But no footsteps approached the door. No one tested the latch. Only silence kept her company, broken by Michael's soft breathing. Morning came with gentle knocking. "Mrs. Miller, I've brought breakfast." Jake stood several feet from the door, holding a covered basket. His respectful distance spoke volumes about his understanding of fear. "You can call me Clara," she said, accepting the basket through the barely opened door. Jake smiled, the first genuine warmth she'd seen from him. "Then you can call me Jake." Days fell into a careful rhythm. Jake brought meals and left them on the porch, never pushing for conversation, never demanding acknowledgement. Clara began to venture outside, first just to the well for water, then to hang Michael's diapers on the line Jake had strung between two posts. She watched him work around the ranch, always busy, but never too far away, as if he wanted her to know she wasn't alone, but also wasn't trapped. One morning, Clara found a gift beside her breakfast, a wooden rattle carved with tiny flowers and sanded smooth as silk. Michael's eyes widened with delight at its gentle sound. When Jake came to collect the empty dishes, Clara stopped him. "Did you make this?" she asked, holding up the rattle. Jake's weathered face colored slightly. "Figured the little one might like something pretty to play with." It was the first crack in the wall Clara had built around her heart. That evening, she left her own gift on Jake's porch, a loaf of bread baked in the cabin's small oven. The next morning brought a note tucked under her door. "Best bread I've tasted in 3 years, thank you. Jay." Slowly, like ice yielding to spring warmth, they began building something that resembled friendship. Clara learned that Jake had lost his wife Sarah and infant daughter Emma to fever 4 years earlier, which explained both his gentle way with Michael and his understanding of grief that cut bone deep. Jake learned that Clara's husband Tom had been a charming gambler who'd died in a saloon fight, leaving behind debts that consumed everything she owned. "I never wanted to be on that auction block," Clara confessed one evening as they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching the first stars appear. Michael dozed contentedly in her arms, finally gaining the weight and color of a healthy baby. "After the creditors took the house, I had nowhere to go. The sheriff said it was either the auction or debtor's prison, and I couldn't let Michael grow up behind bars." Jake continued whittling a piece of pine, wood shavings curling at his feet. "Sometimes life backs us into corners we never imagined we'd see. The measure of a person isn't whether they end up there, but how they find their way out." Clara studied his profile in the lamplight. "Is that what you did? Helped us find our way out?" "Maybe," Jake admitted. "Or maybe you helped me find my way out of a corner I didn't know I was in." The loneliness in his voice made Clara's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. For the first time since Tom's death, she felt something other than fear or desperation stirring in her heart, something that might have been hope. October brought fierce storms that rattled the cabin windows and sent rain driving across the plains in sheets. During one particularly violent night, Michael woke screaming, terrified by thunder that seemed to shake the very earth. Clara paced the small room, trying to comfort him, when gentle knocking came at the door. Jake stood on the porch, soaked to the skin, holding a lantern against the driving wind. "Storm's getting worse," he called over the howling. "Cabin's solid, but if you'd feel safer in the main house, you're both welcome." Clara hesitated. The offer was practical, even necessary, but it meant trusting him with more than her safety. It meant trusting him with her vulnerability. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that made the cabin shudder. "Yes," she called back. "Please help us." Jake wrapped his coat around her and Michael, then led them through the storm to the main house. The parlor blazed with warmth and light, a sanctuary against the chaos outside. He showed her to a comfortable guest room and provided everything they might need before retreating to his own quarters. As Clara settled Michael in the improvised crib Jake had quickly assembled from chairs and blankets, she realized this was the first time in months she felt truly secure. Not just physically protected, but emotionally sheltered by someone who asked nothing in return. The feeling was both wonderful and terrifying. The storm raged through the night, but Clara slept more deeply than she had since before Tom's death. She woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting from the kitchen. Jake was already up, preparing breakfast with the practiced efficiency of a man long accustomed to caring for himself. "Storm's passed, but there's flooding in the bottoms," he said without looking up from the stove. "Might be a day or two before it's safe to cross back to the cabin." Clara bounced Michael gently, trying to read Jake's carefully neutral expression. Was their extended presence welcome, tolerated, resented? "I can cook," she offered hesitantly, "and clean. I don't want to be a burden." Jake turned to face her directly, his gray eyes serious. "Clara, you're not a burden. You're a guest in my home, and guests don't cook their own meals." His tone brooked no argument, but his eyes were kind. "Besides, it's been 4 years since I've had someone to cook for besides myself." They spent that day in cautious companionship. Clara mended Jake's shirts while he repaired a broken harness, both stealing glances when they thought the other wasn't watching. Michael seemed to sense the peaceful atmosphere and was unusually content, playing with his rattle and cooing at dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight. That evening, as they sat by the fireplace after supper, Jake began talking about his late wife Sarah. "She would have loved Michael," he said, watching the baby sleep in Clara's arms. "Always wanted more children after Emma. Said the house felt too quiet with just the 3 of us." His voice thickened with memory. "They died within hours of each other. Same fever took them both while I was in town buying medicine that came too late." Tears pricked Clara's eyes. "I'm sorry, Jake. That must have been unbearable." He nodded, staring into the dancing flames. "Thought about selling out, leaving this place. Everything reminded me of what I'd lost. But then I realized running wouldn't bring them back or heal the hurt. Sometimes staying and finding new purpose takes more courage than leaving." "Is that what you did?" Clara asked softly. "Found new purpose?" Jake looked at her and Michael, his expression gentle but serious. "Maybe I'm still finding it." When the floodwaters receded 2 days later, Clara returned to the cabin, but something fundamental had shifted between them. The careful distance they'd maintained began to seem less like safety and more like an obstacle to something both wanted but feared to name. Jake began joining her for supper, bringing vegetables from his garden and milk from his cows. They talked about books, the ranch, Michael's rapid development, and slowly, carefully, began sharing deeper pieces of their hearts. The town, however, remained unwelcoming. When Clara accompanied Jake to the trading post for supplies, eyes followed their every move. Old women whispered behind gloved hands, calling her the auction widow and Jake's charity case. Men looked her up and down with expressions ranging from pity to something darker. Clara held Michael close and kept her chin high, answering their judgment with dignified silence. "Pay them no mind," Jake said as they loaded flour and coffee into his wagon. "Folks here have short memories for their own sins and long ones for everyone else's." But trouble was brewing. Word had reached the county seat about Jake's purchase, and creditors were circling like vultures. One cold November morning, 3 men rode up to the ranch, rough-looking characters with badges and papers. "You harboring stolen property here, Avery?" the leader called, dismounting with theatrical authority. He was a thin man with yellowed teeth and the aggressive posture of someone compensating for natural cowardice. Jake stepped out of the barn, pitchfork in hand. "This is private land. State your business or move on." Business is the widow Miller. Turns out that auction was illegal, conducted without proper county oversight. She's to be returned for resale, or you pay the full debt her husband left behind, $2,000. Clara appeared at the cabin door, Michael in her arms, her face pale but determined. Jake positioned himself between her and the men. "She's not property," Jake said, his voice deadly calm. "She's a free woman under my protection." The thin man laughed, but there was nervousness in it. "Protection? From what? The law?" "We got papers, Avery, legal documents." "I've got something more legal than your papers," Jake replied, his hand moving to rest on his gun belt. "The right to defend what's mine." "What's yours?" The man's eyes glittered with malice. "You claiming ownership now?" "I'm claiming responsibility," Jake corrected. "There's a difference you wouldn't understand." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara stepped forward, surprising everyone, including herself. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I've been sold once. It won't happen again." One of the other men, younger and more hot-headed, reached for his weapon. Jake was faster, his Colt clearing leather with practiced ease. "Easy, boys. No need for this to get ugly." The thin man raised his hands, but his smile remained cruel. "This ain't over, Avery. Law's coming whether you like it or not." "Then let it come," Jake replied, "but it'll find her under my roof and my protection." The men mounted up and rode away, leaving dust and threats in their wake. Clara's hands were shaking as Jake holstered his gun. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "You could have been killed." Jake looked at her, something burning in his gray eyes. "Because some things are worth fighting for. You're worth fighting for." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and unspoken feelings. Clara felt tears threaten, but they weren't tears of fear. They were something else entirely. Winter settled over Cedar Bend with unusual gentleness, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Clara had been at the ranch for 4 months now, and the changes in both her and Michael were remarkable. The baby had grown plump and healthy, his laughter ringing through the cabin like music. Clara herself had filled out, color returning to her cheeks, strength to her limbs. More importantly, other women had begun to arrive. It started with Sarah Hutchins, a widow from the next county, who'd heard whispers of a place where women could find sanctuary. She arrived on foot, leading a tired mule, her face bearing the purple remnants of someone's fists. Clara took her in without question, offering the cabin's second cot and a share of everything she had. Then came Maria Santos, fleeing an arranged marriage to a man who'd already buried 2 wives under suspicious circumstances. After her, a young woman named Beth, who never spoke of what she was running from, but whose nightmares told the story clearly enough. Jake never complained about the growing population of refugees. Instead, he quietly began converting the old bunkhouse, installing a proper stove, fixing the roof, building additional beds. When Clara tried to thank him, he waved her off. "Sarah would have done the same," he said simply. "House was always meant to be full of life." One evening in late December, as snow began to fall in lazy spirals outside the windows, Clara found herself alone with Jake in the main house while the other women tended to their children in the bunkhouse. Michael slept peacefully in a basket near the fire, his tiny fists curled against his chest. "Jake," Clara said, her voice soft in the firelight, "I need to tell you something." He looked up from the harness he was mending, his full attention on her. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Jake's hand stilled on the leather. "Clara, I know what you're going to say," she interrupted, "that I'm confused, that I'm grateful and mistaking it for something else. But I've been married before, Jake. I know the difference between gratitude and love." Jake set down the harness and moved to sit beside her on the settee. "What if you're wrong? What if 6 months from now you realize you were just seeking shelter from the storm?" Clara turned to face him fully. "Then I'll be wrong. But I'd rather risk being wrong about love than spend my life being right about loneliness." Jake reached up to cup her face with his calloused hands. "I love you too, Clara Miller. Have for weeks now. But I need to know you're choosing me, not just choosing not to be alone." Clara smiled, the first expression of pure joy he'd seen from her. "I'm choosing you, Jake Avery. Not because I'm afraid of being alone, but because I want to build something beautiful with you." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, full of promise and hope. Michael stirred in his basket, as if giving his approval to this new arrangement. When they broke apart, both had tears in their eyes, tears of joy rather than sorrow for the first time in far too long. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Cedar Bend Ranch in pristine white. Inside, by the warmth of the fire, two broken souls had found each other and begun the work of healing, not just themselves, but anyone else who needed shelter from the storm. Spring arrived early that year, painting the prairie with wildflowers and new grass. Jake and Clara were married in a simple ceremony in the ranch house parlor, with only the circuit preacher and the women from the bunkhouse as witnesses. Michael, now crawling and babbling constantly, wore a tiny white shirt that Clara had sewn from one of Sarah's stored linens, a gift Jake had offered with love rather than pain. Sarah always said love multiplies when it's shared, never divides, he'd told Clara when she hesitantly asked about using the precious fabric. She would have wanted her things to bring joy to another child. The wedding was simple but profound. As they exchanged rings, Jake's mother's wedding band for Clara, his father's for him, Jake whispered, "I promise to choose you every day, Clara Avery. In good times and hard times, in plenty and in want, I choose you." Clara's response came through tears of happiness. "I promise to trust you with my heart, to build our home with you, and to never forget that love is the only currency that truly matters." The years that followed were marked not by grand events, but by the steady accumulation of small joys. Cedar Bend Ranch became known throughout the territory as a place of refuge, though never officially advertised as such. Word spread quietly among desperate women, whispered in sewing circles, passed between neighbors, carried by traveling preachers who understood the difference between law and justice. Clara transformed the old root cellar into a nursery for infants whose mothers needed rest. The vegetable garden expanded to feed the growing population, with neat rows of beans, squash, and corn, tended by women who found healing in coaxing life from the soil. Jake built additional shelters, not grand structures, but solid, weatherproof buildings where a woman could sleep without fear of the door being kicked in. The town of Mercy Ridge remained divided in its opinion of what they called Avery's Reform House. Some viewed it with suspicion, claiming Jake was harboring criminals and runaway wives. Others saw it as a necessary mercy in a harsh land. The sheriff, a pragmatic man named Tom Wheeler, chose to look the other way as long as no official complaints were filed. "Far as I can tell," he told his deputy, "Avery's doing the Lord's work. We got enough real criminals to chase without bothering folks who just want to sleep peaceful." But not everyone was content to let sleeping dogs lie. The trouble that had been brewing since Clara's arrival finally came to a head on a blazing hot day in July. Silas Cray, the auctioneer who had sold Clara, arrived with a marshal from the county seat and a legal document demanding her return. Auction was illegal, Cray declared, waving the papers in Jake's face. No proper notice given, debts not fully disclosed. The sale is void, and she owes $2,000 in back debts. Pay up, or hand her over. Jake stood on his front porch, Clara beside him and Michael, now a sturdy 3-year-old, clinging to his mother's skirts. The other women watched from the bunkhouse windows, their own children pressed close. "That woman is my wife," Jake said calmly. "Any debts from her previous marriage were settled when I paid for her freedom." Marshall Hayes, a decent man caught in an uncomfortable situation, shifted uneasily. "I'm sorry, Mr. Avery, but the law is the law. The auction has been ruled invalid by the county court. Either the debts are paid in full, or Mrs. Avery returns to custody." "Over my dead body," Jake replied, his hand moving to his gun belt. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. "I have something to say." All eyes turned to her. She held Michael's hand tightly, drawing strength from his small fingers wrapped around hers. "Mr. Cray," she said, addressing the auctioneer directly, "you sold me like a piece of livestock. You chained me to a post while I was still bleeding from childbirth, and let men bid on me like I was a broodmare." Cray's face flushed red. "You were legal property, payment for debts owed." "I was a human being," Clara interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "I am a human being, and I will not be bought, sold, or traded ever again." She turned to the marshal. "Sir, you seem like a decent man. I ask you, is it legal in this territory to sell a free woman against her will?" Marshall Hayes looked uncomfortable. "Well, no, ma'am, but the debts were my husband's, not mine. I never signed for them, never agreed to them, never benefited from them. Under territorial law, a woman cannot be held responsible for debts incurred without her knowledge or consent." Jake stared at his wife in amazement. In the 3 years since their marriage, Clara had been studying law books borrowed from the circuit judge, preparing for this exact moment. The marshal consulted his papers, frowning. That's actually correct. If you can prove you had no knowledge of the debts." Clara disappeared into the house and returned with a small wooden box. From it, she withdrew a letter written in her own hand and witnessed by the preacher. "This is a sworn statement detailing everything I knew about my husband's gambling. As you can see, the amounts mentioned are far less than what Mr. Cray claims I owe." Cray sputtered, but his bluster was fading. The marshal read the document carefully, his expression thoughtful. "This seems to be in order," he said finally. "Ma'am, I think you've got a strong case that these debts aren't legally yours to pay." "Now hold on just a minute," Cray began. "No, sir, you hold on," Jake interrupted. "You've harassed my family long enough. If you want to pursue this matter further, you can do it through the proper legal channels. But you will not set foot on my land again." The marshal nodded approvingly. "That sounds reasonable. Mr. Cray, I suggest you consult with a lawyer before making any more demands." As the two men rode away, Clara sagged with relief. Jake wrapped his arms around her, marveling at the strength his quiet wife had shown. "Where did you learn to argue law like that?" he asked. Clara smiled. "From Judge Morrison's law books. I figured if men could use the law to enslave women, maybe women could use it to set themselves free." The incident marked a turning point for the ranch. Word spread that Clara had successfully challenged an illegal auction, and more women began arriving, not just those fleeing violence, but those fighting legal battles for their freedom, their property, their children. Clara became an unofficial legal advisor, helping women understand their rights and draft documents to protect themselves. Jake expanded the library, ordering legal texts and precedent books from back east. Together, they created something unprecedented in the territory, a place where women could not only find physical sanctuary, but legal empowerment. Michael grew into a thoughtful boy who accepted the constant stream of new aunties and children as perfectly normal. He learned to read from women who had been denied education themselves, but were determined their children would have better opportunities. He learned compassion from watching his parents welcome strangers with open hearts. One autumn evening, as Clara tucked Michael into bed, he asked the question she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "Mama, why do some ladies come here crying and others leave here smiling?" Clara sat on the edge of his bed, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes, Michael, people get hurt by others who are supposed to take care of them. When that happens, they need a safe place to heal. Like when I scrape my knee and you put medicine on it? Something like that, yes. But these hurts are on the inside, where you can't see them. Michael nodded solemnly. And Papa Jake fixes the inside hurts? Clara smiled. Papa Jake and I help, but mostly the ladies fix their own hurts. They just need time and safety to do it. Will they all get better? I hope so, sweetheart. I really hope so. As the years passed, Cedar Bend Ranch became more than a refuge. It became a symbol. Women throughout the territory knew that if all else failed, if law and family and society abandoned them, there was a place where they would be welcomed without judgment or condition. Clara kept meticulous records in her journal, not of the women's names or stories, those were private, but of the healing she witnessed. A young woman learning to laugh again after escaping a brutal marriage. A widow discovering she could support herself through skill with a needle. A mother reunited with children she'd thought lost forever. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was in Jake himself. The lonely, grief-stricken man who had bought Clara's freedom had evolved into something larger, a protector, a provider, a father figure to dozens of lost souls. His quiet strength became legendary, his gentle wisdom sought after by women who had lost faith in the goodness of men. The changing seasons marked the passing of time as the homestead grew into a true sanctuary. Children's laughter now rang across the fields, weaving with the sounds of cattle lowing, hens clucking, and garden tools striking rich soil. No one asked what had brought each resident to Cedar Bend. Here, everyone was known by their first name and for their courage in coming. Clara and Jake's marriage settled into an enduring, quiet partnership. Their evenings were spent on the porch, Jake's arm around Clara's shoulders, watching Michael invent games with children from every corner of the territory. Clara maintained the ledger of daily needs, made lists for seeds and flour, and taught reading in the evenings to mothers and children alike. Rainy days found the women mending blankets, swapping stories, and planning for the future. Sarah Hutchins, the first who had come seeking refuge, became Clara's closest friend, teaching her the art of pie baking and how to find wild onions hidden in the prairie grass. Belle learned enough English to write home for her family and began working as a seamstress. Maria, who'd arrived afraid to speak, sang lullabies from her childhood, bringing comfort to the youngest. Fall brought the wheat harvest, weekends spent canning apples, and the arrival of a traveling preacher, Reverend Silas Black. Revered for never asking the women to relive their pain, he sat among them and listened. One Sunday, under the big cottonwood, he led a blessing of the homestead. Lord, let this be a place of new beginnings. Heal hearts, mend bodies, and help those who shelter here remember who they are. Afterward, the children raced to the bunkhouse for peach cobbler, and Clara watched their joy, her own heart mending in soft ripples. But hardship still reached the ranch. One bitter January, a bout of fever swept through, striking down Sarah, Michael, and 2 others. Jake and Clara moved from bed to bed, bringing water, soup, and cool cloths for fevered brows. Clara didn't sleep for 3 nights, talking softly to Michael through his worst spells. "You'll see the cotton bloom in spring, darling. You'll ride again with Papa." When the worst passed and the fever retreated, their bonds deepened. Another spring, a rider appeared at dawn, battered and bruised, clutching a bundle tight to her chest. A girl of no more than 16, eyes hollow, lips blue. Clara ran to her, helped her down, and learned the baby was only a few days old. The girl, Ruth, could not speak for the first week, but slowly began working the garden with Maria and singing to her child. Jake's reputation grew. Neighbors arrived not for charity, but to trade bread, cheese, and eggs for help with fencing or a share in the garden's bounty. Even the sheriff's wife sent letters bearing news or requests for advice. One day, Michael wedged himself onto Jake's lap after supper, serious-eyed. "Papa, how come you let so many people stay here?" Jake put aside his cup. "Because everyone deserves a safe place, son, just like you and your mama did." "But weren't you scared?" Jake smiled, his gaze distant. "Scared of losing myself, maybe. But when you care for others, it's hard to stay lost. Clara leaned into Jake's side. Michael, each person here helps us grow. We learn from them, share with them. A home isn't the building, it's everyone in it. Michael nodded, satisfied with the answer only a child could understand. As he ran out to join the other children, Jake pulled Clara closer. "The world changes," he murmured, "and so do we." By the 4th year, Cedar Bend Ranch was not just a haven for women, but a community of second chances. The gardens doubled in size. The bunkhouse was painted blue on Clara's suggestion, and a new classroom was built from rough pine. Jake hosted barn dances. Clara's bread was the talk of every Sunday. The preacher arrived less often, but always with stories, tales of women who left Cedar Bend and transformed nearby towns, started schools, or remarried gentlemen and raised families. Clara wrote their names in a quiet book she kept under the kitchen shelf, a record of hope fulfilled. Trouble still at times found them. The auctioneer Cray sent lawyers twice, but was rebuffed both times by the deft paperwork Clara prepared and Jake's unwavering resolve. "We have law on our side," Clara would say, smiling, pen tucked behind her ear, sleeves dusty from her work. The sheriff came on horseback with a new deputy, a young woman named Alice. She observed the ranch, asked questions, and left impressed. "If half the territory ran like Cedar Bend, I'd sleep easier," she told Clara. Maria, now fluent in English, organized a reading group. June built a sewing business, mended shirts and dresses for neighbors in exchange for supplies. Sarah married a local widower and moved across the river, sending letters full of drawings by her new stepdaughter. Belle went east to study medicine, coming back each summer to assist with children's bruises and illnesses. One warm fall evening, Clara gathered the women and children around the porch. They shared memories, laughter, small confessions, and forgiveness. Jake listened, rocking gently in his old chair. Belle, visiting for the harvest, asked, "Clara, do you ever wish for your old life?" Clara's hands were still for a long time. "I wish I'd seen Mercy sooner. I wish all of you had too. But mostly, I'm grateful for now." Sarah squeezed her hand. "We belong somewhere safe. That's all any of us ever wanted." Clara smiled, the lines at the corner of her eyes shimmering in the twilight. "We built that wish together." Michael, now nearly 8, danced around the chairs with other children, whooping and laughing, their bare feet thudding against the porch boards. Winters were sometimes hard. The bunkhouse roof needed mending each year. The creek flooded and had to be sandbagged. Jake aged, his beard turning fully gray, but never lost the quiet humor or hard-earned wisdom that carried them all. Clara's hands grew cracked and strong, but she baked every Sunday. Her bread won the county fair 3 straight autumns. She continued writing in her ledger and her journal, filling it with stories, recipes, and advice for the future. "If you ever read this," she wrote, "let mercy be your first gift. The rest will follow." Jake became a figure respected across the region, asked for advice by men and women alike. He rebuilt the barn after a lightning strike, organized livestock drives for neighbors, and was elected to the school board, with the first reading class named after Sarah Hutchins. The final legal challenge came from Cray in their 5th year. Armed with new paperwork, he appeared with a young lawyer who demanded a hearing at the county seat. Clara and Jake gathered their evidence, rode to the courthouse with Maria and Belle as witnesses, and presented a robust case. The judge ruled in their favor, stating, "To deny the right to shelter, safety, and dignity is to deny the very heart of justice. The Avery homestead stands as proof of what can be accomplished when mercy is given a home." The victory was celebrated with music, bread, and laughter, filling the ranch with more joy than it had ever known. At sunset, Clara sat on the porch with Jake, watching Michael and Ruth's little girl picking wildflowers. Jake's arm around her, Clara wrote in her journal, "I was once sold for less than a horse. I was loved as a woman, and in the end, love was the only price that mattered. Mercy is persistent. Mercy is stubborn. Mercy becomes us. Jake read her words and nodded. Let's keep building, Clara. There's always more hope to plant. And beneath the broad Texas sky, Cedar Bend Ranch remained a steady beacon, a place where mercy slept and woke with every sunrise.